Fiona Schreier. Welcome to In the Scenes. Here are some updates on what's happening in the film industry. Last week, a new trailer for the highly anticipated A Complete Unknown was released by Searchlight Pictures. The movie is helmed by Ford v Ferrari director James Mangold and stars Academy Award nominee Timothée Chalamet as the folk music icon Bob Dylan. The movie follows Bob Dylan's arrival into the 1960s New York folk scene up to his electrical debut at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival. The trailer gave audiences a more in-depth look at Timothée Chalamet's performance as the cover of Like a Rolling Stone plays throughout the trailer. Audiences were even surprised at the end when Johnny Cash, played by Boyd Holbrook, made an appearance. James Mangold previously directed Joaquin Phoenix as the role in the 2005 Johnny Cash biopic, Walk the Line. If one thing's for certain, James Mangold really likes Johnny Cash. In other news, Matt Damon is in talks to star in Oppenheimer director Christopher Nolan's next movie. The details of the movie are under wraps, but Christopher Nolan is returning to Universal Studios for this project, which is set to release in July 2026. This project is just after Chris Nolan's 7-time Academy Award-winning film Oppenheimer, for which Nolan himself received the awards for Best Picture and Best Director. The upcoming Nolan film is the third collaboration between Damon and Nolan. Nolan previously directed Damon in Oppenheimer and Interstellar. Fans have speculated what the next film is going to be, with some hoping Nolan will venture into the horror genre and others hoping for a time travel-related plot that Nolan is so infamous for. Some highly anticipated movies have recently flopped at the box office. First, the failure of Megalopolis, Francis Ford Coppola's long-gestating passion project. The Adam Driver-led film only opened to $4 million against a budget of $120 million, most of which was put up by Coppola himself. The more high-profile bomb is Joker Folie à Deux, which opened to $37.8 million. That might not seem so bad until you remember that the first one opened to $96.2 million domestic. And while the budget on the first movie was $55 million, the sequel had a cost of $190 million. The sequel suffered from negative reviews since its premiere at the Venice Film Festival and has continued to flounder since. In positive box office news, Wicked has now become the second highest seller of pre-sale tickets this year, behind only Deadpool and Wolverine. The film is part one of an adaptation of the beloved musical and is expected to do well at the box office with a November 22nd release date and hopefully dominate the holiday season. That's all I've got for today. Stick around after the break to hear Jamie Bass and I discuss screenwriting.
So, what do you think?
What is this?
What do you mean?
There's 14 spelling errors, the formatting's all wrong. JFK would never fall in love with Pinocchio, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay, well, these spelling errors are for dramatic effect, but I digress.
I just think it could use a couple more drafts.
As they all do. Welcome back to In the Scenes, our film talk show where we tackle a variety of subjects related to filmmaking.
I'm Fiona.
And I'm Jamie.
If you couldn't tell, this episode is about writers. What do you think, personally, makes a good screenplay?
I'm glad you asked. I think screenplays are at their best when they separate themselves from the mold. You know, I love stylized writing. I love structure. I love when a movie's playing with structure, maybe if it's like non-linear or when a movie's told in chapters. I love when a movie's like, when a movie hits me with that chapter 1 title card, I'm like, I'm in, baby.
We're ready.
So yeah, just being, but you know, at the end of the day, it's just about like telling stories. So as long as it tells a good story, I think, a good story in a unique way, that's basically what I would boil it down to.
Yeah.
What about you?
I definitely think everything you said is important about like having a good story, but I think for me, a really critical part about a screenplay is having interesting characters. Because if you have an interesting character, you're gonna want to sit with them like through whatever. Even if you're doing something incredibly mundane, if you have a character who reacts to that in an interesting way, it's like that is so much more interesting than like a boring guy going on some like crazy thing. It's like, yeah, but he's boring. Like, give me something, me something interesting.
Something exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that something I've been told a lot is like, conflict and interesting plot, it comes out of having good and interesting characters. Like, if you have interesting characters, they are going to get themselves into interesting situations. Versus if you have a boring character that you are trying to force into an interesting situation, there's like a void at the center of your story.
Yeah, it feels a lot more like functional, like
Yeah.
like homework. Like you don't want a movie to feel like homework.
You never want
That's
a movie to feel like
awful.
homework. And when you have boring characters or characters who like aren't fully developed, it can really start to feel like homework.
Yeah. So why don't we get into the movies that we chose for today's episode?
Yeah.
Would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I chose When Harry Met Sally, which is a film that I absolutely love. When Harry Met Sally is a movie about the friendship between Harry Burns, played by Billy Crystal, and Sally Albright, played by Meg Ryan. Harry and Sally get to know each other, coming out of their first serious relationships of both of their lives, and they decide we are not going to get romantically involved because it will ruin the friendship. And then they get romantically involved and it ruins the friendship, but it's fun and it's fine and it's lovely. It's just such a wonderful movie. And it's definitely like a rewatchable movie.
Yeah, especially now that we're getting into the fall season.
Exactly,
You know,
exactly.
like
You're kind of
sweaters.
doing Harry Burns
Yeah,
cosplay
this
now.
This was the point. This was,
Absolutely.
no mistake.
I think it's just a wonderful film, and it was directed by Rob Reiner, iconic, but it was written by Nora Ephron, who is iconic in her own right, especially to women who are funny and like to write. She's just wonderful. But this screenplay of hers, it was inspired kind of by conversations with her and Rob Reiner, where she was shocked, like, men really act like this, and he was shocked, like, women do that? But that's neither here nor there. An important concept to understanding Nora Ephron's writing, and she was a journalist and a novelist and a screenwriter and then eventually a director in her own right, is this phrase that she learned, everything is copy. This idea is that everything that happens in your life is material. It is to be mined for your artwork. And you can see that a lot in the characters of Harry and Sally, who are both so heavily mined from Nora Ephron and Rob Reiner. Harry Burns is the kind of guy who at first glance you meet him and you're like, I'm gonna hate you so much. He's written to be the most annoying guy in the first scene when you meet him, and a lot of that is based off of Rob Reiner or Rob Reiner's family. In kind of a really interesting way, the specificity of some of the stuff, he's, in the first scene, he's eating grapes and he's like throwing them out the window.
Oh yeah,
Or
like
throwing
the
them
picks out the window?
And that's pulled from Rob Reiner's grandfather. Specificity like that you might miss if you aren't looking at your life and mining it. Now, of course, the counterpoint there is like, is that like a great way to like approach your life? I don't know, but in terms of screenwriting, it works. And then Sally Albright is very much based off of Nora Ephron, the kind of type A person that she is. She has like specific underwear for days of the week. That's based on Nora Ephron. She has very hyper-specific orders. This is like a recurring theme throughout the movie, and that is based on Nora Ephron, to the point where somebody once, Nora Ephron was ordering food one time, and somebody was like, have you ever seen the movie When Harry Met Sally? You're just like that. The point here being, as I said earlier about creating interesting characters, the way that this movie is structured, it's kind of a lot of vignettes. It's kind of like, we're here for a rom-com, so we know, of course, that we're gonna watch a rom-com and we're gonna have a great time watching a rom-com. But if you don't have that in your head when you're watching it, it's just a lot of vignettes where it's like, these two characters meet and they come into conflict and then like they go their separate ways until the movie really gets cooking. And without having these incredibly interesting characters at the center, I think that would be a lot, like it would be so much worse if you didn't have the kind of specificity and those quirks within those characters. It would be like, whatever, he's just an annoying guy, he's just an uptight girl, and instead like there's so much love in the characters and so many observed details that I think Nora Ephron is so great at. In another movie of hers, You've Got Mail, there's a bit where Meg Ryan, again, is mad at Tom Hanks, and she's mad at him because he's taking too much caviar, and she yells at him like, "That's a garnish." And that's the kind of thing that Nora Ephron notices and expounds upon, like, you're ordering food the wrong way.
Yeah, it's like these like little annoyances, these little grievances you have like going about life. It's like she's always like, she's got like a bank up here where she's like got this laundry list of these like tiny like minute things about the human condition that she puts on the page for, you know, whether it's You've Got Mail or When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah, it's things like that she notices. And then, of course, the relationship at the center of it. The movie has this thing happening where it's like, can men and women be friends? Which is kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that, but the movie also doesn't, like, I feel like that's only just like the opening question, and then it's like not really about that. It's about like these two people like coming together and coming apart and coming together across their lives. But the romance is just so compelling, and again, it comes from the quirks and the conflict that these characters build up. As you've seen this movie, you know these are like two opposite people, and so they're always coming into conflict with each other. And like I said, even though it's told in these vignettes, because there's conflict in every scene, I think it's like you're just drawn in and you want to keep watching and keep watching. I think it's really beautiful.
One of my favorite things about this movie is, like, you were talking about the vignette sort of structure that it has. I love the, like, interspersed bits of, like, the real couples. I don't know if they're actors or...
I have to, you know, I should have checked, but I have to assume that they're actors.
Yeah, but it's like documentary, like, the dialogue does feel written in those points, so it's probably not like documentary, like, true blue documentary, but
in
it's
a
like,
documentary style.
Yeah, it's these just like this like one shot of these people talking about like how they met and like how long they've been married, and I think it really, like, I don't know, it grounds the movie like a lot, because the you know, this movie is very lived in, but it's also like the dialogue's really stylized. You know, you have that one scene where they're all talking on the phone, and it's the four-way phone conversation where Harry's talking to Carrie Fisher's husband, and Meg Ryan's talking to Carrie Fisher.
What a great scene.
And it's so like...
Carrie Fisher, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, Carrie Fisher in this movie is incredible. And it's really like tightly constructed. It's like very, very written, like very stylized, but the documentary portions and also like all the stuff we've talked about with, like, you know, these little grievances, it makes the movie feel a lot more human. And I don't know, it's just, I love watching this movie.
The friends, I think, are a great example of like creating interesting characters. There's the incredible scene where Carrie Fisher is trying to find a man for Meg Ryan, and she's flipping through her Rolodex, and she pulls out some guy's name, and Meg Ryan's like, no, he's married. And she's like, married? And she just folds the card over and puts it back in. Little details like that, again, like pulling from this bank that she has in her head of like, how can I add more specificity? How can I add little quirks to these characters? And then, of course, like, this is a comedy, and I think comedies often tend to be a very collaborative effort. And like I said, she was pulling from Rob Reiner's life, and Billy Crystal was also kind of contributing to the jokes, and Meg Ryan contributed to the famous Cats deli scene, which I won't expound upon more, but I'm sure all our viewers know what I'm talking about.
It's the most like famous. I feel like it's a thing that most people know about this movie before they go in.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you have to know. It's just such a wonderful movie, and I think that Nora Ephron, in her novels or in a lot of her writing, she can be very cynical. I think before When Harry Met Sally and You've Got Mail, which have now like eclipsed this in her career for a lot of people, she wrote this beautiful novella called Heartburn, which was about her divorce from Carl Bernstein, one of the guys who broke the Watergate case, and it's about how he was like horrible to her. But the novella is vaguely, like barely fictionalized. And it's incredibly cynical about like life and love and heterosexual relations and like how any of this works. And when you're watching When Harry Met Sally, the characters kind of reflect that cynicism. They're always like, it's never gonna work. Men and women can't be friends. Somewhere between 30 seconds and all night, that's your problem. Like, there's no way to get through this. And then the film kind of surprises you by being like, no, actually, we believe in love, and this is all gonna turn out okay. Originally, they were not supposed to get together. And then Rob Reiner was feeling pretty down on himself. He was single, and then he met someone, and he fell in love, and they got married, and he was like, hold on a second, no. We gotta, we gotta.
He believes in love again.
We believe in love again. And I think that's beautiful to have these, to merge the very cynical parts of her writing with the very sweet parts. And like you said, it's more human. Like, whenever you see a character who's just like, oh yes, I love love and everything's happy for me and nothing ever goes wrong, you're like, well, good for you, but I cannot speak to that.
That's not how I am. That's not how anyone else is.
I cannot speak to that at all. But instead, having these characters like overcome their cynicism bit by bit, like over the course, like over the span of this movie, I think it's just so wonderful. I think the movie is obviously iconic, and I think that so much of that falls to Nora's screenplay.
Absolutely, and it's so iconic to the point where it's like, people are like, oh yeah, When Harry Met Sally has a great screenplay, but they like, if you really look into it, it's so perfectly constructed.
It's so
and
perfectly constructed.
So funny. Oh my God. So the stadium scene.
It's so funny. I feel like I could just be here all night saying it's so funny. Like, and that's true. It's all in like those well observed moments of just knowing like, what is a weird thing we as humans do, and like, why don't we show that really weird thing, or why don't we talk about that really weird thing? And sometimes you call attention, like the movie really calls attention to it. Sometimes it's just a throwaway gag, but either way, you know, like, okay, these are real people. I know somebody like that. I do that, and
Absolutely.
That just adds so much to it. So, Jamie, what did you decide to talk about today?
So for this episode, I chose the film The Royal Tenenbaums, directed by Wes Anderson. The film follows the eccentric Tenenbaum children who gather for the first time in years after learning that their absent father, Royal, is dying of cancer. The children all carry their own personal baggage. All of them are former child geniuses who have fallen out of fame in their adult years. But during their reunion, their familial traumas bubble back up to the surface, and the tensions in the Tenenbaum home rise. The film was directed by Wes Anderson. He's had this like incredible career since. He's made films like Moonrise Kingdom and Grand Budapest Hotel, most recently Asteroid City. It was written by Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson, who is also in the film as Eli Cash, who is a sort of family friend who causes a bit of trouble. This is their third screenplay that they've written together, and their final screenplay that they wrote together. Sadly, I wish they would get back in the booth for something else, I digress. Their past two films, Bottle Rocket and Rushmore, have this sort of Peanuts style, like, a bunch of like inept but like lovable guys that are like trapped in these larger than life situations. Obviously, most people know Owen Wilson as, you know, actor. He's Lightning McQueen. He's in Night at the Museum. He's in all those kind of movies.
Sorry, continue. Continue.
Yeah, Night at the Museum was a weird pool. But anyways, they came up with the idea for this screenplay together, but Owen Wilson couldn't work on it as much as he did with Rushmore and Bottle Rocket before. So I was listening to the director's commentary, and Wes Anderson sort of talks about writing this movie as he wrote it like mostly like physically by himself, but he was using a language that him and Owen sort of cultivated in their past two projects. It's just really interesting collaboration that they've had.
Yeah.
Especially like, and he's in all of his movies afterwards. But, and it's, I don't know, this movie, it's like, it's really difficult to explain, but it's like, it has like big fairy tale energy. It feels like it feels like a storybook.
Yeah. I mean, It kind of is. It has
It
the
is.
narrator.
Yeah,
And
it has like it's narrated by Alec Baldwin, and he's like giving well, people have said things about Alec Baldwin. He's a controversial figure these days, but he narrates this movie and he sort of gives all the exposition. You know, it has like this film's like opening 15 minutes. There's so many characters that you need to be acquainted to, and that's all through the narration. And usually in, you know, when you're writing stuff, you're supposed to show that on screen rather than like tell it directly to the audience. But I think, you know, this film, like, as I was saying, it's like a storybook, and the first shot of the movie is literally like the title card, but it's on a book that's being checked out of a library. Mm-hmm. So it's this weird like book within a movie, and it exists as like, you know, Alec Baldwin is like this writer who has you know, like documented this family and their troubles. And I think it makes it like really, I don't know, it gives it, like I said, it has like fairy tale vibes, and it gives it like its own sort of style. There's so many incredible actors in this movie. Gene Hackman obviously plays Royal Tenenbaum, who is this old curmudgeon-y guy who has low-key ruined all of his children's lives.
low-key.
Yeah, it's really dark subject. But anyways, you know, Ben Stiller's in it. He and his 2 children are always wearing these like red tracksuits. All of these characters in this movie and all of Wes's movies have such specific character dynamics, like looks, and just just ways that they act. And you know, Ben Stiller, he's this silly guy. We know Ben Stiller is a silly guy, but in like actuality, in this movie, he's like recovering from like the very recent death of his wife, and how, you know, like the first time we meet Ben Stiller as an adult, his character, he's doing this like fire drill that his kids need to escape at like 3 a.m, and like he's like yelling at him with a megaphone, which is funny. This movie is very funny, but I think a big part of it is that like there's a big part of this in a lot of Wes's movies is that there is a funny side and there's a sad side, but they're usually like kind of entangled in a way. And it's like these characters, like I said, Ben Stiller puts his kids through this insane like helicopter parent impromptu fire alarm thing, but he's doing that because he has not gotten over like his wife died, and there's always like a dark like humanist like flip to all the humor in this movie. In essence, it's just about these children who are so messed up in their childhood. They were like put on this pedestal so early, and it's mostly due to their parents who kind of it's not really like, it's like very like thinly shaded in the movie, but it does seem kind of exploitative, like, and it kind of brings into the conversation like, should we have like these child like prodigies who are like dissected in the media, and how that messes them up inside. And in Wes Anderson's career, I think a big thing about his characters is that they're deeply messed up people, and they have really no way to sort of put that into words. It is like life, in that like the funny stuff and the sad stuff go hand in hand, and life isn't all sad all the time, even when there's like awful sad stuff happening. I don't know, it's not realistic, because none of his movies are really realistic. They're all very heightened. Again, you know, everyone kind of knows that like all of his movies are, you know, symmetrical, and you know, all the dialogue is very written, like very little room for improvisation. But I think that is like, in a greater sense, I think the way he's structuring the story in like, you know, all these fine details that can't be changed is like a way of trying to make these characters feel like they are okay in a way.
I think that a lot of people criticize the style, which is like, you know, either you gel with it or you don't. But I think that a lot of what he's trying to get at is like, these are people who have like no way of talking about what's happening to them, what has happened to them, what is going to happen, and they just have no way of like connecting with others. And so like every layer, like you're saying, every layer of artifice, like the forced deadpan, the symmetrical, it's just another way of them like trying to build a structure in a world that is
Yes,
structureless.
absolutely, absolutely. In all of his movies, the emotion always comes out. When that emotion finally comes out, it truly like sucker punches you. I think the way that Wes writes is that he can make you cry in just like a sentence. Like you're laughing, you were laughing like 10 seconds ago, and then suddenly stuff gets really fast. And people like to say that his movies can be like cynical, and that the way like the characters are like, all of his characters are such messed up people, but I think there's usually like a glimmer of hope. Like these characters, like I said, the emotion eventually comes through.
By having these incredibly mannered characters, it kind of puts you off guard for the emotions to cut through when they do.
You never expect it. Like even I've seen this movie like 4 times, and I every time it's just like I'm having so much fun, and then ow.
Yeah.
Like it really hurts. Like the final line from Ben Stiller, where he's just like, "I've had a rough year, Dad." It's just like it gets me every single time, and it's, I don't know, it's.
And it's through that accumulation of structure that a line as simple as that is able to cut so deep.
Absolutely, he's sort of like always building these beautiful castles, and like inside is where like all the messed up stuff is happening, and slowly everything just kind of begins to crumble, and then what's left is like just pure like heartache. But I think like in these characters admitting that, there is a lot of hope. So yeah, I love this movie so much.
It's a great movie.
So Fiona, what would you say you learn about screenwriting from watching When Harry Met Sally?
I would say that, as I've mentioned many times throughout this episode, everything is copy. You need to be able to look around at your life and see like what is interesting to you, what's some weird quirk that you or your friend have, what's something that like annoys you so much that you can't stop thinking about it, and then write that into your work. And you know, it doesn't have to just be like those little kind of things. I think like stronger emotional themes that are running through your life are also absolutely fair game. But I think what those little quirks will add up to is really interesting characters. And I think that above all else, you gotta have interesting characters that keep people watching and keep us wondering, like, are they gonna be okay?
Yeah.
Are they gonna turn out well? That's what it's all about. Yeah. What would you say you learned from the Royal Tenenbaums?
Well, like from what you were saying, I really think like character is the thing. Like if we didn't have characters, we wouldn't have movies essentially. I mean, but I think creating distinct characters and taking the time to sort of like map out how like their personality is and like backstory and their baggage, I think that's a really important thing to do when, especially in a film like Royal Tenenbaums, which juggles like 15 different characters who are all kind of on the same plane. It's like this big ensemble cast, and I think the reason that it works and doesn't feel messy is because the characters are so immediately distinct, and the film style does a lot to tell you about these characters in a very like quick manner. And I think like with this and like all of Wes Anderson's movies, like I think this is his longest movie, and it's still like under 2 hours, which is crazy.
I can't validate that.
Yeah, that's like off the top of my head, and I think like just being brisk about, you know, how you convey information about like, you know, what to include, what not to include, what to tell, what to show, you know, I think it's just really, I think this is like a really effective like way to write an ensemble and make sure like the audience isn't getting like too confused about like, wait, so this character has this relationship with this character.
Yeah, what's their deal?
Yeah, you don't want the audience to be confused. You want them to clue in, but you don't want it to seem like homework, because if it's like homework, then you lose people so fast.
And then it's over.
Yeah, it's over. So you just have to like make the setup interesting, I'd say. Like, you know, you have to lay all this out, and it could seem boring, and you could choose to convey it in a boring way. But I think there are definitely ways to introduce characters and like exposition in a really distinct way. Of course, this does it with like the book framing device, but just in general, I think exposition can be streamlined into something that is as entertaining as like the nitty gritty of the movie, like the main drama.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's all for this episode of In the Scenes. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, and TikTok at SGTV at USC.
To keep up with all of our content, be sure to also visit us online at sgtv@usc.com. For SGTV, I'm Jamie Bass.
And I'm Fiona Schreier. From all of us here at SGTV,
have a great night, Carolina.